She walked into his office with tears in her eyes and a resignation letter in her trembling hands. She was ready to give up on everything. But when he locked the door and said, "You're not leaving, you're staying with me," something changed. What started as a cry for help turned into a connection impossible to ignore. Between deep glances, accidental touches, and revealed secrets, two wounded hearts discovered that sometimes a fresh start is closer than we think. The CEO's office door creaked slightly when Olivia Carter opened it with trembling hands. The sound echoed through the empty hallway on the 33rd floor of Matthews & Co. There, the silence of the night seemed to amplify every racing beat of her heart. It was almost 9 on a rainy Friday night in New York, and the city lights flickered through the panoramic windows like silent witnesses to a moment that would change everything. She shouldn't have been there. Not like this. With red, swollen eyes, smudged mascara staining her pale cheeks, messy brown hair falling over her shoulders. Her navy blue blazer, the one she always wore to important presentations like professional armor, was wrinkled, the buttons crooked. Olivia looked like a destroyed version of herself, and that was exactly how she felt, destroyed. For the past 2 years, she had given everything to that company. Sleepless nights, reviewing financial reports, sacrificed weekends fixing mistakes that weren't hers, meetings where her ideas were stolen by Rick Sullivan, her direct supervisor, a man in his early 40s, with a fake smile and an inflated ego who turned every workday into an emotional minefield. Incompetent. Slow. You'll never be good enough. His words echoed in Olivia's mind like invisible scars. Every public criticism, every humiliation disguised as constructive feedback, every look of contempt in front of her colleagues. All of it had eroded her confidence until only an empty shell remained where there had once been a brilliant, ambitious woman passionate about what she did. But that night, something inside her broke. Maybe it was the way Rick yelled at her in front of the entire team, accusing her of sabotaging a project he himself had ruined with his impulsive decisions. Maybe it was the cruel laughter from colleagues who preferred to align with power rather than defend the truth. Or maybe it was simply the accumulated exhaustion of pretending everything was fine when, in reality, she was falling apart inside. Olivia typed the resignation letter at home, her hands shaking so badly she had to rewrite it 3 times. Each word felt like a goodbye, not just to the job, but to a part of herself she didn't know if she could recover. When she finished, she carefully folded the paper, placed it inside a white envelope, and decided to deliver it directly to CEO Aiden Matthews, the man at the top of the pyramid, someone she had never met personally, but whose reputation for impeccable leadership and strategic vision was legendary in the corporate world. She didn't expect him to still be in the office, but the light shining under the door and the muffled sound of typing confirmed his presence. Olivia took a deep breath, or tried to, because the air seemed trapped in her chest, and knocked lightly on the door. "Come in." His voice sounded deep, controlled, but with a hint of tiredness that humanized the man behind the title. When Olivia opened the door, the first thing that hit her was the smell. A mix of strong coffee, varnished wood, and a subtle masculine fragrance, woody and enveloping. The office was spacious, elegant, with shelves filled with business books and an imposing mahogany desk where Aiden Matthews sat. His tie loosened, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing toned forearms. He looked up, and Olivia felt as if the entire world stopped. Aiden Matthews was 36 years old, but he carried a presence that seemed timeless, penetrating gray-green eyes that seemed to see beyond the masks people wore, dark hair slightly disheveled as if he had run his hand through it several times during long work hours, strong jawline, serious expression, but not cold. There was something about him, an intensity, an absolute attention that made anyone feel seen, truly seen. And in that moment, when he saw Olivia with her tear-stained face and shoulders curved under the weight of a silent war, something changed in his expression. The professional mask fell for an instant, replaced by genuine concern that caught her off guard. "Olivia Carter," he said her name slowly, as if he were etching each syllable into memory. She blinked, surprised. He knew who she was. I came to deliver this," she managed to murmur, extending the envelope with still trembling hands. Her voice came out weak, broken, filled with a pain she could no longer hide. Aiden didn't take the envelope immediately. Instead, he stood up from his chair with a fluid movement and walked toward her. Each step echoed softly on the wooden floor. He was tall, much taller than she had imagined, and when he stood just a few steps away, Olivia could feel the warmth emanating from him, a physical presence that filled the space between them with palpable electricity. What happened? The question came, accompanied by a deep gaze fixed on her eyes, as if he were trying to read her soul. Olivia tried to answer, but the words refused to come out. Instead, more tears fell, silent and unstoppable. She hated being like this. Vulnerable, exposed, weak in front of a man she only knew by reputation. Aiden gently took the envelope from her hands, opened it, and read quickly. When he finished, he said nothing for a long moment. The silence was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the windows and Olivia's uneven breathing. Then he did something completely unexpected. He walked to the door, locked it with a soft click, and returned close to her. "You're not leaving. Not today. Not like this. You're staying with me." The words fell into the space between them like both a declaration and a challenge. Olivia stared at him, confused, scared, but also intrigued. There was something in the way he said "with me." Not like a boss giving orders, but like an invitation, almost intimate. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I know what's happening to you, Olivia. I know about Rick. And I know I've stayed silent for too long." His voice carried a weight of guilt and determination. "But that ends now." He moved one step closer, and Olivia felt his scent wrap around her, the warmth of his body almost touching hers. His eyes, those impossible-to-ignore eyes, held her with an intensity that made her heart race, for reasons completely different from fear. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Aiden hesitated, as if he were fighting something inside himself. Then, with devastating sincerity, he answered, "Because I see you." And in that moment, under the soft lights of the office, with rain drumming against the windows and the outside world fading away, Olivia realized that something had changed. She still didn't know what, but she felt it. He felt it too. The silence that settled in Aiden Matthews' office was the kind that made time seem suspended. Olivia could hear her own heart beating erratically, each pulse echoing in her ears like a war drum. The rain kept falling outside, heavy and steady, turning the city view into a blur of golden and silver lights dancing through the fogged glass. She was still holding the resignation letter, or rather, Aiden was holding it, but their fingers remained close, almost touching. That proximity was unsettling, not in a negative way, but the kind of unsettling that shakes all certainties, that challenges everything you thought you knew about professional boundaries and safe distance. "You said you see me," Olivia repeated, her voice still trembling but filled with a curiosity she couldn't hide. "What does that mean?" Aiden took a step back, as if he needed space to breathe, to organize his thoughts. He walked to the window, hands in his black dress pants pockets, shoulders tense beneath his white shirt. For a moment, he just watched the storm outside, his reflection in the glass revealing an expression that mixed frustration with something deeper. "Maybe regret. I observe all the employees in my company, Olivia. It's my responsibility to know who's building this with me," he began, his voice controlled but filled with contained emotion. "But you were always different." He turned to face her, and Olivia felt the impact of those gray-green eyes like a punch to the stomach. There was truth there, raw truth, without corporate filters or convenient diplomacy. "I saw your reports, every brilliant analysis you produced, every creative solution that saved projects that were sinking, every time Rick took credit for your work and presented it as his own." Aiden's jaw tightened, contained anger vibrating in every word. "I saw it. And I did nothing. That makes me sick." Olivia blinked, processing the confession. Part of her wanted to scream, to ask why he hadn't intervened earlier if he knew everything. But another part, the part that could still see beyond her own pain, recognized the courage it took for a CEO to admit failure, to take responsibility for inaction. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, wiping the last tears from her face with the back of her hand. Aiden walked back toward her, and this time he didn't stop at a safe distance. He stood close enough that Olivia could see the small lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples, the way the office's soft light highlighted the intensity of his gaze. "Because I can't let you leave believing you have no value. Because that would be a lie. And because—" He hesitated, as if he were about to cross an invisible line that couldn't be undone. "Because I want you with me. I want you to help me rebuild this company. No intermediaries. No people like Rick between us. Just you and me." The air seemed to escape from Olivia's lungs. His words echoed in the space between them, loaded with multiple meanings. Just you and me. It was a professional proposal. It had to be. But the way he said it, the tone of his voice, the intensity of his gaze, there were layers there. Dangerous layers. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice failing. "I don't know if I still have it in me. Rick. He broke your confidence." "I know." Aiden took another step forward, and now they were so close that Olivia could feel his warmth, could see the subtle movement of his chest rising and falling with each breath. "But he didn't break who you are. He just made you forget for a while." Then Aiden did something that stole all the oxygen from the room. He extended his hand, not to shake hers in a formal greeting, but simply to hold it. His hand was large, warm, with calluses on his fingertips that suggested he wasn't just an office executive, but someone who still worked with his own hands when necessary. Olivia looked at the extended hand, her heart racing. It was just a hand, just a gesture, but it felt like much more than that. It felt like an invitation to something bigger, something frightening and, at the same time, impossible to resist. She hesitated for 1 second, 2, 3, and then, with a tremor that came more from emotional impact than fear, she placed her hand in his. The connection was electric. There was no other word to describe it. His touch was firm, secure, but at the same time incredibly gentle, as if he were holding something precious that could break. His fingers wrapped around hers, and Olivia felt a shiver run up her spine, her skin tingling where they touched. "You're brilliant, Olivia," Aiden said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And I'm going to prove it to you every day if I have to." He released her hand, but not immediately. There was a moment of reluctance, as if they were both caught in an invisible gravity that made it difficult to pull away. When they finally separated their hands, the air between them still vibrated with the energy of that touch. Aiden walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small white badge with gold details. Her name was already printed on it. Olivia Carter, Associate Executive Director. "This is yours," he said, extending the badge. "Starting Monday, you work directly with me. 33rd floor. No Rick, no intermediaries, no one to diminish what you're capable of doing." Olivia took the badge with still trembling hands, but this time the tremor was different. It wasn't fear. It was something between disbelief and hope, an emotion she had forgotten she was capable of feeling. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice filled with vulnerability. "You don't even really know me." Aiden stared at her for a long moment, his eyes traveling across her face, as if he were memorizing every detail. There was something in that gaze that made Olivia feel exposed and protected at the same time, as if he were seeing not just who she was, but who she could be. "I know enough," he replied. And for the first time since she entered the office, a soft smile, almost imperceptible, touched his lips. It wasn't a corporate or polite smile. It was genuine, warm, and it made something strange happen in Olivia's chest, as if something frozen inside her began to melt. She held the badge against her chest, feeling its weight, both literal and symbolic. It was a second chance, a fresh start, but it was also something more. She could feel it in the way Aiden looked at her, in the way the space between them seemed to carry an invisible electric current. "I'll see you Monday," she said, her voice finally steady, filled with renewed determination. "I'll be waiting," Aiden responded. And the way he said it, paused, intentional, made it seem like he wasn't just talking about work. Olivia turned to leave, but when her hand touched the door handle, his voice stopped her. "Olivia." She looked back. "Thank you for not giving up yet." Their eyes met for another prolonged moment, and Olivia nodded, unable to trust words. Then she opened the door and left, the cold hallway contrasting with the warmth still pulsing on her skin where he had touched her. As she walked toward the elevator, Olivia looked at the badge in her hands, and a silent question echoed in her mind. What just happened here? She had no answer. Not yet. But something inside her, something that had been buried under months of abuse and devaluation, began to awaken. And upstairs, in the 33rd floor office, Aiden Matthews stood by the window watching the storm outside but thinking only of her. Monday arrived wrapped in a golden mist of morning sun that invaded Manhattan like a silent promise of new beginnings. Olivia woke at 5:30 inches the morning, her heart already racing before the alarm even went off. She had spent the entire weekend alternating between moments of excited euphoria and paralyzing panic attacks. What if I'm not good enough? What if it's all a mistake? What if he changes his mind? But whenever insecurity threatened to consume her, she looked at the gold badge on her nightstand, Olivia Carter, Associate Executive Director, and something inside her calmed down. This was real. It was happening. And she deserved it. She chose her outfit carefully, a navy blue sheath dress that hugged her curves elegantly without being provocative, black pumps with medium heels that made her feel confident and powerful, and her hair pulled back in an impeccable low bun. Subtle but carefully done makeup, enough to disguise the sleepless night and highlight the brown eyes that today shone with a mixture of anxiety and determination. When Olivia entered the Matthews & Co. lobby at 8:15 inches the morning, everything seemed different. Not because the building had changed the same mirrored glass walls, the same polished Italian marble floors, the same strategically positioned tropical plants, but because she was different. She walked differently, breathed differently, existed differently. The exclusive elevator to the 33rd floor required the new badge. When the brushed steel doors closed and the elevator began to rise with a soft hum, Olivia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. You can do this. You deserve to be here. The discreet sound of the bell announced arrival. The doors opened, and Olivia was greeted by an environment completely different from what she was used to. If the lower floors were corporate and functional, the 33rd floor was sophistication personified. Light wood flooring, oak-paneled walls, carefully chosen contemporary artworks, abundant natural lighting through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city waking up. And there, near her new office, her office was him. Aiden Matthews was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to his elbows like Friday night, his dark blue tie impeccably adjusted. His hair was combed back, but some rebellious strands were already starting to fall over his forehead. He wore prescription glasses with a thin, discreet frame that Olivia hadn't seen before, and that, for some reason, made him even more attractive, adding a layer of intellectuality to his already magnetic presence. When his eyes met hers, something passed between them. It wasn't just professional recognition or corporate cordiality. It was something more visceral, deeper, as if they both shared a secret that no one else in the building knew. "Welcome," he said, his deep voice carrying a genuine warmth that made Olivia's stomach do a little flip. "Thank you," she replied, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. She was nervous, God. She was so nervous, but she could hide it reasonably well. Aiden stepped away from the door and made an inviting gesture. "This is your office. I hope it's to your liking." Olivia walked in and felt as if she had been transported to another universe. The office was spacious, elegantly decorated with a modern glass desk, ergonomic leather chair, built-in shelves, a light gray sofa near the window, and she noticed with a tightness in her chest a small succulent plant in a white ceramic pot on the desk with a simple card propped beside it. To new beginnings. She picked up the card, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the high-quality paper. The handwriting was elegant, masculine, handwritten. He had written this personally. "You didn't have to," she said softly, turning to face him. Aiden had entered the office behind her and now stood just a few steps away, hands in his pockets, his expression soft but attentive. "I wanted to," he replied simply. "You deserve to know that you're welcome here. Truly." There was a moment of silence, not uncomfortable, but charged. Olivia could feel his attention on her like a warm, constant weight, and when she looked up, she found those gray-green eyes watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "So," Aiden said, breaking the moment before it became too heavy, "shall we get to work?" The first few hours passed in a blur of meetings, strategic project presentations, and immersion in high-level decision-making processes. Olivia quickly discovered that working directly with Aidan was an experience completely different from anything she had experienced before. He wasn't just smart, he was brilliant, with a strategic analysis capability that left her impressed. But more than that, he listened to her. Really listened. When she presented an idea, he didn't interrupt her. When she questioned a decision, he didn't take offense. When she suggested an alternative approach, he seriously considered it, pondered, and often agreed. It was invigorating, liberating, as if she finally had permission to use all the potential that had been stifled for so long. "Your analysis on the Latin American market expansion is impeccable," Aidan commented around noon, reviewing the report she had prepared over the weekend because, even in crisis, Olivia was incapable of not working. "This is exactly the kind of strategic vision we need here." He was sitting on the edge of her desk arms crossed, his glasses hanging from his shirt collar now that he had finished reading. Was the proximity intentional? Olivia wasn't sure, but she felt it. She felt his warmth, the smell of that subtle woody fragrance she was already beginning to associate with security and competence. "Thank you," she said, trying to maintain a professional tone even when she noticed how his eyes lingered on her face a second longer than strictly necessary. "Don't thank me for what's rightfully yours," Aidan replied, his voice dropping slightly. "You're good at what you do, Olivia. Very good. And it's time everyone here knows it." There was something in the way he said her name, Olivia, that made the words sound different, more intimate, as if it were a secret shared only between the two of them. The afternoon brought a meeting with department directors, and Olivia felt the shift in atmosphere as soon as she entered the conference room next to Aidan. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others surprised, some veiled with distrust. And there, at the far end of the table with a red face and eyes wide with barely contained rage, was Rick Sullivan. "Before we begin," Aidan said, his voice cutting through the low murmur with natural authority, "I want to officially introduce Olivia Carter as our new Associate Executive Director. She'll be working directly with me on all of the company's strategic initiatives." The silence that followed was tense. Rick opened his mouth to speak, but Aidan raised his hand in a gesture that wasn't aggressive but absolutely final. "Olivia brings a strategic perspective and analytical capability that are essential for the next stage of Matthews & Co." Aidan continued, and then his eyes met Olivia's for a brief moment, a look of support, encouragement, of "You've got this. I expect everyone here to treat her with the respect she deserves." "Any questions?" No one said anything. Rick looked ready to explode but remained silent, his fists clenched on the table. The meeting proceeded, and Olivia surprised herself with her own performance. She presented ideas clearly, answered questions confidently, challenged assumptions when necessary, and the entire time she could feel Aidan's presence beside her, not dominating the space, but supporting her like a silent pillar of strength. When the meeting ended and everyone left, Aidan lightly touched her arm, just a brief touch, almost imperceptible, but one that sent a wave of warmth across Olivia's skin. "You were perfect," he said, his voice low and filled with something that went beyond professional approval. "I was dying of nerves," she admitted with a small smile. It didn't show. Not at all. He was still close, so close that Olivia could see the small golden flecks in his eyes, the fine lines around his mouth that appeared when he smiled. There was a moment, just a moment, when neither of them moved. The air between them seemed to become denser, warmer, charged with a tension that wasn't uncomfortable but dangerously attractive. Then Aidan pulled back, clearing his throat. "Let's get back to work." But when he turned, Olivia saw, or thought she saw, a brief flash of something in his eyes. Something that suggested pulling back had required effort. That he felt it too, and as they returned to the 33rd floor, side by side in the silent elevator, Olivia realized that something was changing between them, slowly, dangerously, inevitably. 3 weeks had passed since Olivia moved up to the 33rd floor, and the routine that had established itself between her and Aidan was simultaneously productive and disturbingly intimate. They worked in perfect sync. She anticipated his needs before he verbalized them. He trusted her analyses without question, and together they created strategies that were transforming Matthews & Co. into something even more impressive than it already was. But there was something more, something unspoken that hung in the air whenever they were alone, glances that lingered a second too long, accidental touches that seemed to send electric currents across their skin, silences loaded with unspoken words. It was as if they were both walking a fine line between professionalism and something infinitely more dangerous. That Thursday, the clock read 10:40 at night when Olivia finally leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. The city outside was a sea of twinkling lights, and the office was immersed in an almost reverent silence, broken only by the distant sound of the air conditioning and the occasional click of Aiden's mouse in the next room. She should have gone home hours ago, but the presentation for the Japanese investors the next morning was crucial, and she wanted every detail to be perfect. Besides, and this was a truth she was reluctant to admit, even to herself, there was something comforting about being there, so close to him, even in separate rooms. "You're still here." Aiden's voice made her jump slightly. She looked up to find him standing in her office doorway, his tie completely removed now, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a strip of tanned skin and the beginning of a defined chest. His hair was messy, as if he'd run his hands through it several times in frustration or exhaustion. He was holding 2 coffee cups, and the rich roasted smell filled the space. "Still here," Olivia replied, accepting the cup he extended. Their fingers brushed briefly, a touch so light it could barely be called a touch, but one that left her skin tingling. "I want to review the numbers one more time." Aiden didn't return to his office. Instead, he walked in, closed the door behind him, a casual gesture, but one that somehow made the space feel more intimate, more isolated from the rest of the world, and sat on the sofa near the window, stretching his long legs and letting out a deep sigh. "You're too much of a perfectionist," he commented, but there was a small smile on his lips, a softness in his eyes that transformed the observation into a disguised compliment. "Coming from you?" "That's ironic," Olivia retorted, turning her chair to face him. The soft light from the desk lamp created interesting shadows on his face, accentuating the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his lips, the intensity of those eyes that seemed to see through all masks. "Touché." He took a sip of coffee, and Olivia caught herself watching the movement of his throat as he swallowed, the way his long fingers held the cup with a delicacy that contrasted with the raw masculinity of his presence. "Stop it," she reprimanded herself silently. "He's your boss. This is completely inappropriate." But her heart didn't seem to care about appropriate or inappropriate. It just kept racing whenever Aiden was around. "Can I ask you a question?" Olivia asked before she could stop herself. The exhaustion of the long night lowering her usual defenses. "Always," Aiden replied. And there was something in the way he said it, sincere, open, as if he really wanted to know her beyond spreadsheets and presentations, that encouraged her to continue. "Why are you still here? You could have an entire team doing this. Why do you stay late, working as if you were still a junior analyst?" Aiden was silent for a moment, his gaze lost in the city's nighttime view. When he finally spoke, his voice had a reflective quality, vulnerable in a way she rarely heard. "Because I built this," he said softly. "Every decision, every risk, every victory, every failure, it all went through my hands. And I can't delegate passion. I can share responsibility, but the care, the commitment to doing it right, that's too personal to outsource." Olivia felt something tighten in her chest. She knew that feeling. That need to care so much it hurts. That inability to do things halfway. "I understand," she said. And by the way his eyes turned to her, intense and penetrating, Olivia knew he believed her. "I know you understand," Aiden replied, getting up from the sofa and walking toward her. He stopped behind her chair, and Olivia felt his warmth before she even consciously registered the proximity. She could feel his physical presence, large, solid, comforting, and disturbing. At the same time, the woody scent she was already beginning to associate with security, power, and something dangerously seductive. "Let me see what you're reviewing," he said, leaning over her shoulder to look at the computer screen. His breath lightly brushed her ear, and Olivia had to make a conscious effort to keep breathing normally. He was so close she could feel the heat from his body radiating through his shirt, could see the hair on his forearm when he reached out to point at something on the screen, could hear his steady breathing as he analyzed the numbers. "Here," he said, his finger touching the monitor. "This projection calculation. You can be more aggressive." The Japanese respect boldness when it comes with solid data, and you have the data. Olivia turned her face slightly to respond and suddenly found herself inches from his face, so close she could see the small expression lines around his eyes, the texture of his skin, the way his lips parted slightly in surprise at the unexpected proximity. Time seemed to freeze. Neither of them moved. His eyes dropped to her lips, a quick movement, almost imperceptible, but one that Olivia caught and that made her heart stumble over its own rhythm. "Aiden," she whispered, not quite sure if it was a warning or an invitation. He closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening as if he were fighting an internal battle. Then, with what seemed like visible effort, he pulled away, stepping back a few paces and running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I shouldn't. This isn't appropriate." Olivia turned her chair completely to face him, her heart still racing, her skin still tingling where his breath had brushed. Part of her wanted to agree, reinforce professional boundaries, return to the safe zone. But another part, a brave and honest part that was tired of pretending, wanted to challenge him. "Why isn't it appropriate?" she asked, her voice firmer than she expected. Aiden stared at her, and the intensity in his gaze was almost palpable. "Because you work for me. Because there's a power dynamic here that I can't ignore. Because I don't want you to feel like there's any kind of pressure." "What if I tell you it's not pressure?" Olivia stood up from her chair, walking until she was just a few steps from him. "What if I tell you I feel this too?" The expression on Aiden's face changed: surprise, desire, conflict, all mixed in a storm of emotions he couldn't completely hide. "Olivia, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She took another step. "I feel it when you look at me. I feel it when you're close. I feel this tension between us, and I know you feel it too. Feeling doesn't mean we should act on it," Aiden replied. But his voice was failing, his resolve wavering. "You intrigue me," he said suddenly, the words escaping like a confession he didn't intend to make. "From the moment you walked into my office crying with that resignation letter in your hands, you've intrigued me in a way I can't explain." "And you confuse me," Olivia replied, a small smile touching her lips. "You make me feel safe and completely off balance at the same time." They stood there with only a few inches separating them, the air between them so dense it seemed hard to breathe. The city kept pulsing outside, but inside that room there were only the two of them, and that impossible to ignore tension. Aiden slowly raised his hand, hesitant, and for a moment Olivia thought he was going to touch her. But then he pulled back, shoving his hands in his pockets as if it were the only way to control himself. "We should go home," he finally said, his voice loaded with something that sounded dangerously close to repressed desire. "It's late. You need to rest for tomorrow." Olivia nodded, knowing he was right, but part of her wishing he was wrong, that he would be reckless, that he would cross that line they were both dancing around. But he didn't cross it. Not yet. When Olivia grabbed her bag and passed by him toward the door, their shoulders brushed a minimal touch, almost nothing, but one that left both of them fully aware that something had changed that night. Something inevitable was approaching, and neither of them knew if they had the strength to resist. The invitation arrived Friday morning, delivered personally by Aiden in a cream paper envelope with the initials embossed in gold. Olivia was reviewing contracts when he walked into her office, lightly knocking on the already open door, a gesture of respect she had learned to value in him. "I need to ask you a favor," Aiden said, leaning against the doorframe with that casual posture that somehow managed to be simultaneously relaxed and magnetic. He was wearing an impeccable charcoal suit today, the silver tie matching perfectly, and Olivia had to make a conscious effort not to let her gaze linger. "Of course," she replied, turning her chair to face him. "What do you need?" He extended the envelope, and when Olivia opened it, she found an elegant card with handwritten script. "Dinner with investors and family. Matthews Mansion. Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Formal attire. Important investors from Europe are in town," Aiden explained, entering the room completely and closing the door behind him, a habit that now happened whenever they needed to talk about something beyond work. "My mother insists on hosting them at home, and she strongly suggested I bring you." Olivia blinked, surprised. "Your mother suggested it?" A small, almost embarrassed smile touched Aiden's lips. She heard about the new director who's revolutionizing the company's strategy, her words, not mine, and got curious. But I understand if you don't want to go. I know it's the weekend, and this is beyond your responsibilities. I'll go, Olivia interrupted before he could finish. The idea of spending a Saturday evening at a formal dinner with investors and Aiden's family should have scared her, but instead she felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. I just need to know how formal is formal attire. Aiden's smile widened, and there was something in his eyes, a warm approval, a gleam of satisfaction that made Olivia's stomach do a little flip. Long dress, elegant. But you don't need to worry, he said, his voice dropping slightly. You'd look beautiful in anything. The words hung in the air between them, and Olivia felt heat rising up her neck. It wasn't the first time Aiden had made a comment like that, small compliments that walked the fine line between appropriate and intimate, but each time seemed to carry more weight, more meaning. Thank you, she managed to say, holding the invitation against her chest. I'll be there. Great. Aiden stood for another moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but then just nodded and left, leaving his woody scent and a feeling of anticipation in the air. Saturday arrived, wrapped in a nervous anxiety that Olivia couldn't control. She spent hours choosing the perfect dress, eventually deciding on a long, dark wine-red one with a discreet but elegant neckline that hugged her body in a sophisticated way. She left her hair down in soft waves that fell over her shoulders, and her makeup was carefully done but natural, enhancing her brown eyes with a light smoky look and her lips with a rosy nude. When the private driver sent by Aiden stopped in front of her building at 7, Olivia felt her heart race. It wasn't a common corporate car. It was an elegant black Mercedes, and the driver, a middle-aged man in an impeccable uniform, treated her with a deference that made her feel important. The Matthews mansion was in the Upper East Side, an imposing 3-story property in neoclassical style, with perfectly manicured gardens and a circular entrance with a marble fountain that glowed under strategically positioned lighting. Olivia got out of the car, adjusting the small silver clutch in her trembling hands, and that's when she saw him. Aiden was standing at the main entrance at the top of a small stone staircase, wearing an impeccable black tuxedo that seemed to have been custom-made for that body. The bow tie, the pocket square folded with precision, his hair perfectly combed back. He was absolutely stunning, and Olivia felt the air escape from her lungs. But it was the way he looked at her that truly paralyzed her. His eyes traveled from her high heels to her face, and when they finally met her eyes, there was something there, admiration, desire, something deep and undeniable that made all her nervousness transform into an acute awareness of her own skin, her own body, her own presence. Aiden descended the steps slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and when he stopped at the base of the stairs, he extended his hand. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low, hoarse, filled with a sincerity that went far beyond social courtesy. "So do you," Olivia replied without thinking, and then blushed when she realized what she'd said. "I mean, you look elegant, presentable, appropriate for the occasion." An amused smile touched his lips. "Presentable. I'll take the compliment." He offered his arm, and Olivia hesitated for only a second before sliding her hand along his forearm. The tuxedo fabric was soft under her fingers, but underneath she could feel the firm muscle, the warmth of his skin radiating through the clothing. They climbed the steps together, and Olivia was hyper-aware of every point of contact, her hand on his arm, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers, the way he adjusted his pace to match hers. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors with golden veins, paintings that Olivia was certain were originals, antique furniture, combined with modern touches in a way that demonstrated impeccable taste. But more than the decoration, it was the atmosphere, a kind of elegance that came from generations of well-managed wealth, of tradition respected but not rigid. "Aiden." A female voice, warm and enveloping, echoed through the hallway. A woman of about 60 appeared, wearing an elegant navy blue dress, her gray hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun, her eyes the same gray-green shade as Aiden's, shining with intelligence and curiosity. "Mother," Aiden said with a genuine affection that Olivia had never seen in him before. "This is Olivia Carter, our new Associate Executive Director." "Mrs.?" Matthews approached and, to Olivia's surprise, didn't extend her hand for a formal greeting but hugged her warmly. "My son doesn't stop talking about you," she said, stepping back to study Olivia with a penetrating but affectionate gaze. "It's wonderful to finally meet you." Olivia shot a quick glance at Aidan, who had a slightly embarrassed expression, a sight so rare she almost laughed. "It's an honor to be here, Mrs. Matthews," Olivia replied sincerely. "Please call me Eleanor." "Mrs. Matthews said. "Mrs. Matthews makes me feel old." She gave a conspiratorial wink and then turned to Aidan. "The burgers just arrived. You should go greet them." The dinner was a surreal experience. Olivia found herself seated between Aidan and a German investor named Klaus, who was visibly impressed with her knowledge of European markets. The conversation flowed easily: business, culture, travel, and Olivia realized she was genuinely having fun. But what really made the evening special was Aidan. He was attentive in a way that went beyond professional. When the waiter served wine, he discreetly switched her glass for water when he noticed she hadn't touched the alcohol. When Klaus made a joke in German that she didn't understand, Aidan translated in a whisper close enough that only she could hear. When she began talking about the expansion strategy, he supported her without dominating the conversation, letting her shine. And throughout it all, there were the touches, small, subtle, but undeniably intentional. His hand brushing her back when he stood up to get something, his fingers lingering when he passed the salt, his knee pressing lightly against hers under the table, a contact that neither of them rushed to break. "It's the first time I've seen that sparkle in his eyes," Eleanor commented quietly when the men got up to go to the study after dinner. She was sitting next to Olivia, her eyes fixed on her son with a mixture of affection and satisfaction. "In years, it's you." Olivia felt her heart tighten. "We work well together," she said, trying to maintain neutrality. Eleanor laughed softly, a sound full of maternal wisdom. "Dear, I raised that boy. I know when he's working, and I know when he's in love. And what I see when he looks at you," she paused meaningfully, "isn't work." The words kept echoing in Olivia's mind the entire ride back, sitting next to Aidan in the back seat of the Mercedes. The silence between them was comfortable but charged, each lost in thoughts that neither dared to verbalize. "Thank you for coming," Aidan finally said, turning to look at her. The streetlights passed over his face at intervals, creating dramatic shadows. "You were incredible." "Why me?" Olivia suddenly asked, the words escaping before she could filter them. "Of all the people you could have brought, why me?" Aidan was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. "Because you make me want to be someone better," he finally said, his voice low, hoarse, filled with a vulnerability she had never heard before. Olivia felt her eyes burn with unshed tears, not from sadness, but from something much more complex: recognition, connection, the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen by someone. And there, in the intimate silence of the car gliding through the illuminated streets of Manhattan, with inches separating them but an eternity of unspoken things between them, they both knew that something had changed irrevocably. There was no going back, only forward, and what would come next was as frightening as it was inevitable. Monday arrived with a different weight in the air. Olivia entered Matthews & Co. at 8 sharp. Her heart still warmed by memories of Saturday, the way Aidan looked at her, the words he said in the car, the touch of his hand on hers when they said goodbye at her building's entrance. She had spent all of Sunday reliving every moment, every glance, every shared breath. But the warmth of those memories was quickly replaced by palpable tension as soon as she stepped off the elevator on the 33rd floor. Helena, Aidan's executive assistant, was standing near reception with a worried expression, and when she saw Olivia, she approached quickly. "There's an emergency meeting in the main conference room in 15 minutes, Helena said in a low voice, casting a nervous glance down the hallway. "Rick is agitated. He asked to gather all the directors." A cold shiver ran down Olivia's spine. She hadn't seen Rick since that first meeting weeks ago when Aidan introduced her as Associate Executive Director. He had been removed from several important projects since then, and rumors ran through the hallways about his growing instability. "Does Aidan know?" Olivia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's aware, and he's not happy." Helena hesitated, then added, "Be careful, Olivia. Rick isn't someone who accepts losing power peacefully. 15 minutes later, Olivia entered the conference room and immediately felt the weight of multiple stares on her. The room was full, all department directors, some senior managers, and there, at the head of the table opposite where Aiden normally sat, was Rick Sullivan. He had changed in recent weeks, his face thinner, his bloodshot eyes suggesting poorly slept nights, and there was a tension in his shoulders that bordered on desperation. When his eyes met Olivia's, she saw pure rage, not just professional resentment, but something more personal, more venomous. Aiden hadn't arrived yet, and Olivia felt a knot in her stomach as she realized that maybe this was exactly Rick's intention to start before Aiden could control the narrative. "Since everyone's here," Rick began, slapping his palm on the table hard enough to make some people jump, "I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's happening in this company." "Rick, this meeting isn't on the official agenda." James, the financial director, tried to intervene, but Rick cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't care about the agenda. I care about the integrity of this company." He looked directly at Olivia, and the venom in his voice was unmistakable. "Doesn't anyone here find it strange how a junior analyst suddenly becomes associate executive director overnight?" The silence that followed was tense, uncomfortable. Olivia felt her blood freeze in her veins, but forced herself to maintain a neutral expression, her hands folded on the table to hide the trembling. "We all worked years to get where we are," Rick continued, his voice rising in volume and intensity. "We gave blood, sweat, sacrificed time with our families, and then she shows up with tears in her eyes and a resignation letter, and suddenly she's working directly with the CEO. That's enough." James's voice was firm. But Rick was beyond the point of listening to reason. "No, it's not enough." Rick slammed the table again. "You're all thinking the same thing. You just don't have the courage to say it. She didn't rise through competence. She rose because what, Rick?" Aiden's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. He was standing in the doorway, his expression absolutely controlled, but his eyes burning with an icy fury that Olivia had never seen. He wore an impeccable black suit, his tie perfectly adjusted, and there was something in his posture, straight shoulders, clenched jaw, relaxed but ready hands that radiated absolute power. The silence that settled was deafening. Rick visibly paled but tried to maintain his bravado. "Aiden, I was just—" "Finish your sentence, Rick." Aiden entered the room with measured steps, each movement deliberate and loaded with authority. "You were about to make an accusation. Finish it." Rick opened and closed his mouth, his eyes searching for support around the table, but everyone had looked away. He was alone and was beginning to realize the magnitude of the mistake he had made. But Olivia didn't need Aiden to fight this battle for her. Not this time. She stood up slowly, her legs still trembling, but her voice surprisingly firm when she spoke. "I'll finish for you, Rick." All eyes turned to her, including Aiden's, which carried a mixture of surprise and concern. "You were going to suggest that I earned my position through seduction, through personal favors, that I'm not qualified, not competent, and that I'm here only because—" "What?" "Because I'm a woman, and supposedly used that to manipulate the CEO." The way she verbalized the unspoken accusations made several people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Rick was red but didn't deny it. "So let me tell you something, Rick," Olivia continued, walking around the table toward him, each step gaining more confidence. "During the 2 years I worked under your supervision, I arrived before you and left after. I corrected your mistakes on at least 15 projects. I have the emails saved if you want me to list them. I was responsible for closing 3 contracts that you almost lost through incompetence. And all that time, while you yelled at me in meetings, publicly humiliated me, and took credit for my work, I stayed silent." She stopped in front of him, and something had changed in the room's atmosphere. People were no longer looking at her with uncertainty. They were looking with respect, with recognition. "But I'm not staying silent now," Olivia said, her voice low but filled with a strength that came from years of pain transformed into power. "You want to talk about competence, Rick? Then let's talk. I was the one who developed the Asian market penetration strategy that increased our revenue by 17%. I was the one who identified the structural flaws in the logistics department that were costing millions. I was the one who stayed up until 3:00 inches the morning reviewing contracts because you couldn't understand basic legal liability clauses. Each word was a precise thrust, and Rick seemed to shrink with each accusation. Olivia could feel years of anger and frustration flowing through her, but she maintained control, cold, precise, devastating. "Now you want to question how I got here?" She crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on his without blinking. "I got here through work, through competence, through every night I sacrificed, every idea you stole, every humiliation I swallowed. I earned being here, Rick. And the only reason you're questioning it is because you can't accept that someone you tried to destroy not only survived, but thrived." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. And then, slowly, one person began to clap. It was Monica, the human resources director, a woman in her early 50s who had witnessed years of Rick's abuse of power. Others joined in, and soon the entire room was applauding, not enthusiastically or loudly, but with a solemn respect that was infinitely more powerful. Olivia looked at Aiden, and what she saw in his eyes completely disarmed her. It wasn't just pride. It was pure admiration mixed with something deeper, more personal. He looked at her as if he was seeing her truly for the first time and immensely liking what he saw. "You're fired, Rick," Aiden said, his voice calm but absolute. "Not just demoted, fired. HR will process your exit today. You have 1 hour to clear your desk." Rick opened his mouth to protest, but the expression on Aiden's face, cold, implacable, final, made him close it. He stood up unsteadily, shot one last look of hatred at Olivia, and left the room with his shoulders curved in defeat. The meeting was quickly dissolved, people leaving in small groups, many stopping to acknowledge Olivia with respectful nods or brief words of support. When the room finally emptied, only she and Aiden remained. He walked toward her slowly, and when he got close enough, Olivia could see the raw emotion in his eyes, pride, admiration, concern, and something else she couldn't name, but that made her heart race. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly, raising his hand as if to touch her face, but stopping at the last second, his fingers hovering inches from her cheek. "I had to," Olivia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "For me. Not for you. Not for the company. For me." Aiden nodded, and the pride she saw in his eyes was almost overwhelming. "You were magnificent. Absolutely magnificent." His hand finally closed the distance, his fingers lightly touching her face in a caress so gentle it almost hurt. The touch lasted only a second or two, but it was enough to send a wave of warmth across Olivia's skin, to make the rest of the world disappear, to remind her that what existed between them went far beyond professional. "Aiden," she began, but Helena appeared in the doorway, interrupting the moment. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Berger lawyers are on the line," she said, and there was genuine apology in her eyes as she realized what she had interrupted. Aiden pulled back, clearing his throat, the professional mask returning to place. But when he looked at Olivia one last time before leaving, there was a silent promise in those eyes. "This isn't over. We're just beginning." The days following the confrontation with Rick were strange. Olivia felt as if a heavy part she had been carrying for years had finally been released, leaving her lighter, freer, but also more vulnerable. She had exposed herself in a way she never imagined being capable of, not just to Rick, but to the entire room, including Aiden. And now, whenever their eyes met, there was a new layer of intimacy there, an unspoken understanding that went beyond anything professional. Aiden was different too, more attentive, if that was possible, more present. He found reasons to stop by her office, bringing coffee, reviewing documents that could easily be discussed via email, simply asking how she was. And always, always, there was that prolonged moment of eye contact, that extra second when neither looked away, that electric tension that made the air between them seem charged with unexplored possibilities. It was Thursday night, almost 10, and they were alone again on the 33rd floor. It had become an unofficial routine, staying late, working on projects, sharing ideas, and slowly, inevitably, letting professional barriers fall inch by inch. Olivia was reviewing an expansion proposal when she heard her office door open. She didn't need to look to know who it was. She already recognized the sound of his footsteps, the way he filled a space just with his presence. "Still working?" Aiden asked, but his voice had a different tone today, softer, more intimate, as if he too felt that something was about to change. "Always." Olivia replied, turning her chair to face him. He was leaning against the door frame, his tie completely removed, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing the base of his neck and the shadow of his Adam's apple. His sleeves were rolled up, showing defined forearms, and his hair was slightly messy, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. He looked tired, but, more than that, conflicted, as if he were fighting an internal battle he was slowly losing. "I need to talk to you," he said, entering and closing the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded loud in the silence, and Olivia felt her heart race. "About work?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his tone, from the way he looked at her. "No." Aiden approached but didn't sit. Instead, he stood near her desk, hands in his pockets, that gesture she had already learned he made when trying to control himself. "About us." The air seemed to escape from the room. "Us?" The word hung between them, heavy with meaning, impossible to ignore. "Aiden," Olivia began, but he gently raised his hand. "Let me speak first, please." There was a vulnerability in his voice she rarely heard, and it made her fall silent. "Since you walked into my office that Friday, something changed. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just professional admiration, respect for your work, satisfaction in having someone competent by my side." He paused, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "But I was lying to myself, because what I feel when I look at you has nothing to do with reports or strategies or presentations." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. She should interrupt him, reinforce professional boundaries, retreat to the safe zone. But she couldn't, because everything he was saying echoed exactly what she herself had been feeling. "You make me forget everything I thought was control," Aiden continued. And now he was moving, taking his hands out of his pockets, taking a step toward her. "You make me want things I shouldn't want. You make me feel things I've spent years trying to avoid." He stopped in front of her, so close that Olivia had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The intensity in his gaze was almost palpable desire, conflict, vulnerability, determination, all mixed in a storm of emotions she could feel vibrating in the tiny space between them. "I know this is complicated," he said, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "I know there's a power dynamic here that can't be ignored. I know that technically you work for me, and that creates ethical questions I've spent my entire career being careful to avoid." He leaned in slightly, his hands resting on the arms of her chair, trapping her in a way that didn't feel threatening, just intense, intimate, impossible to escape. "But I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore," Aiden confessed, his eyes traveling across her face as if memorizing every detail. "I can't pretend I don't think about you constantly, that I don't look for reasons to be near you, that I don't lie awake at night remembering the way you smile when you solve a complex problem, or how you bite your lip when you're concentrating, or how your eyes sparkle when you're passionate about an idea." Olivia was breathless, literally. She had forgotten how to breathe, and all she could do was look at him, at those gray-green eyes that were revealing truths he could no longer hide. "Aiden," she whispered. But it wasn't an objection. It was almost an invitation. "Tell me you don't feel this," he challenged, his voice rough. "Tell me it's just me, and I'll back off. I'll maintain professional distance. I'll pretend this moment never happened." But Olivia couldn't say that. Couldn't lie, not when every cell in her body was vibrating with his proximity, when every breath carried the woody scent she already associated with security and desire, when every heartbeat screamed the truth she'd been trying to suppress. "I feel it," she admitted, her voice trembling but firm. "God, I feel it so much it scares me." Something changed in Aiden's expression. The conflict gave way to intense determination. He slowly raised his hand, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and when she didn't move, his fingers touched her face with a delicacy that contrasted completely with the intensity of the moment. The touch was electric. His hand was warm, slightly rough, and the way his thumb caressed her cheekbone sent shivers down Olivia's spine. She closed her eyes for a second, just feeling, and when she opened them again, she found Aiden looking at her with a mixture of desire and reverence that stole all the air from her lungs. "You're amazing," he said, his voice low, hoarse, filled with emotion. "Not just for what you do, but for who you are, for the way you got up after being knocked down, for the courage you showed when you confronted Rick, for your intelligence, your passion, the way you light up any space you enter." His fingers slid from her face to her neck, resting lightly at the base, his thumb tracing a soft line along her jaw. Olivia felt her pulse race under his touch, knew he could feel it too, and the intimacy of that of him knowing exactly the effect he had on her was simultaneously frightening and liberating. "I shouldn't want this," Aiden whispered, leaning even closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "But I do. God, I want it so much." "Aiden," Olivia whispered. And this time it was definitely an invitation. Her hands rose almost of their own accord, landing on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as hers through the thin fabric of his shirt. He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening as if gathering courage or fighting against one last resistance. And then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, he began to close the distance between them. Olivia could feel his breath mixing with hers, could see every detail of his face, so close the fine lines around his eyes, the texture of his skin, the way his lips were parted. She tilted her face up, her eyes closing, her entire body tense with anticipation. Their lips were millimeters apart. She could feel the warmth, the promise, the inevitability of what was about to happen. "Aiden, sorry to interrupt, but—" Helena's voice cut through the moment like a bucket of cold water. They separated instantly, Aiden stepping back several paces while Olivia turned her chair back to the desk, both trying to regain composure. Helena stood in the doorway with a mortified expression, clearly realizing she had interrupted something significant. "The European merger lawyers need to speak with you urgently," Helena said, looking at Aiden but carefully avoiding looking at Olivia. "It's about the intellectual property clauses." Aiden closed his eyes for a moment, the frustration visible in the way his jaw tightened. "I'll be right down," he said, his voice controlled but tense. Helena nodded and left quickly, closing the door behind her. The silence that remained was dense, loaded with everything that almost happened and the frustration of having been interrupted. "I need to handle this," Aiden said, but didn't move immediately. He looked at Olivia with an intensity that made her heart stumble. "But this isn't over." It wasn't a question. It was a promise. Olivia nodded, unable to trust words. When Aiden finally left, she remained seated, trembling slightly, her skin still tingling where he had touched her, her lips still anticipating the kiss that didn't happen. But she knew with absolute and terrifying certainty that it was only a matter of time. What existed between them could no longer be denied or postponed. It was inevitable, like gravity, like sunrise. And when it finally happened, it would change everything. 2 days had passed since that interrupted moment, and the tension between Olivia and Aiden had become almost unbearable. They moved around each other like magnets attracted, but maintaining a careful distance, aware that a single touch could ignite everything they'd been trying to control. But control was running out. Olivia felt it in the way Aiden looked at her during meetings, a look that lingered a few seconds too long, that traveled across her face with an intensity that made her heart race. She felt it in the moments when he passed too close in the hallway, his shoulder brushing hers in a contact that seemed accidental but sent waves of heat across her skin. She felt it in the heavy silence that settled whenever they were alone, loaded with everything they wanted to say but didn't dare. It was Saturday night, technically not a work day, but both had shown up at the office with the excuse of finishing the proposal for the Asian investors that would be presented on Monday. The truth, which neither verbalized, was that they needed to be near each other, that the distance of 2 whole weekend days seemed impossible to bear. The 33rd floor was immersed in silence, illuminated only by the soft lights from individual offices and the glow of the city outside. Olivia was in her office but couldn't concentrate. The words on the monitor blurred. The numbers didn't make sense, and her mind kept returning to the same place, to that Thursday night moment, to the feeling of Aiden's fingers on her neck, to the proximity of his lips. She closed her laptop with a frustrated sigh and stood up, walking to the window. The nighttime view of Manhattan was spectacular. From there, an ocean of golden and silver lights stretching as far as the eye could see, but she barely registered the beauty. Her mind was completely consumed by him. "You can't concentrate either." Aiden's voice made her turn abruptly. He was standing in her office doorway, leaning against the frame with that casual posture that somehow always managed to be magnetic. But there was something different about him today. The mask of professional control had completely disappeared, replaced by something rawer, more vulnerable, more real. He was wearing dark jeans, Olivia had never seen him in jeans before and a long-sleeved gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. No tie, no formality, just him. And somehow this more relaxed version of him was even more attractive than the impeccable CEO in a suit. "I can't," Olivia admitted, her voice coming out huskier than intended. "Not since Thursday." Aiden's eyes darkened at that confession, and he entered the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed in the silence, and this time there was no doubt about the intention. There was no work pretense, no excuses. "Me neither," he said, walking toward her with measured steps. "I can't stop thinking about that moment, about what almost happened, about what should have happened." Olivia felt her heart race, blood running hot in her veins. She should pull back, create distance, be sensible, but her body didn't obey. Instead, she remained still, watching him approach as if hypnotized. "Aiden, we should. Say it's not appropriate, that there's a complicated power dynamic, that we should maintain professional distance." He stopped inches from her, so close that Olivia could feel his warmth, could see the subtle movement of his chest rising and falling with each breath. "We've already said all that, and it hasn't changed anything about what I feel." He raised his hand, hesitant, giving her the chance to pull back. When she didn't move, his fingers touched her face, not with hesitation this time, but with a confidence that sent shivers down her spine. "You're amazing," Aiden said, his voice low, hoarse, filled with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Not just for your work, but for the way you exist in the world, for your strength, your vulnerability, the way you make me want to be better, just to be worthy of being near you." His fingers slid from her face to her neck, then to her shoulders, resting lightly but with a weight that seemed to carry years of contained desire. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to resist you," he confessed, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. "And honestly, I don't want to try anymore." Olivia raised her hands and placed them on his chest, feeling his racing heart under her palms. "Then don't resist," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "Because I can't anymore either." Something broke between them. The last thread of resistance snapped, and then Aiden pulled her to him, one hand sliding to the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist, and finally, their lips met. The kiss started hesitant, almost shy, as if they were both testing something precious that could break. His lips were soft, warm, and moved against hers with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. Olivia felt her legs weaken, and Aiden's hands held her more firmly, pulling her even closer. And then something changed. Hesitation gave way to hunger. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more desperate, as if both were trying to make up for weeks of denied proximity. Olivia's hands moved up his chest to his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, and she felt a low groan vibrate in his throat, a sound that sent waves of heat through her entire body. Aiden gently pushed her until her back met the cold glass wall, the temperature contrast making her gasp against his lips. He took advantage of that moment to deepen the kiss, even more, his tongue exploring, teasing, discovering. His hands traveled down her back, descended along the curve of her waist, rose again to her face, holding her as if she were something both precious and irresistible. Olivia had never been kissed like this, with so much passion but also so much care, as if she were simultaneously fragile and powerful, as if he desperately desired her but equally revered her. When they finally separated, breathless, Aiden rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed, his uneven breathing mixing with hers. "God, Olivia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I was trying to be responsible, trying to do the right thing." "And what is the right thing?" she asked, her hands still tangled in his hair, reluctant to let him go. Aiden opened his eyes, and what she saw there completely disarmed her vulnerability. Desire, fear, and determination, all mixed in a look so intense she felt like she could drown in it. "You," he said simply. "You're the right thing, even if it's complicated, even if it's scary, even if it changes everything." He kissed her again, and this time it was slower, more deliberate, as if he were savoring every second. His hands explored, not invasively, but with a reverence that made Olivia feel adored. He kissed the corner of her mouth, the line of her jaw, descended down her neck in a trail that made her tilt her head back. offering more access, a sigh escaping her lips. "You drive me crazy," Aiden murmured against her skin, his voice vibrating in places that sent heat straight to Olivia's core. "The way you smile, the way you think, the way you exist." His hands returned to her face, holding her gently as he looked into her eyes. "This changes everything between us," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I know," Olivia replied, her hands descending to his chest, feeling his racing heart. "And I'm scared." "Me too," Aiden admitted, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "But I'm more scared of the idea of not exploring this, of letting you go, of spending the rest of my life wondering what if." He kissed her again, softer this time, almost tender, and when they separated, there was a new understanding between them. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. But instead of seeming scary, it felt right. "Come with me," Aiden said suddenly, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Where?" Olivia asked, still dizzy from the kiss. The touch, the intensity of everything. "My apartment." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just want to be with you. Really. Without office walls, without laptops, without work pretenses. Just us." Olivia looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity. There was no pressure, no expectation beyond each other's company. And she realized she wanted that too. She wanted to know him beyond the brilliant CEO, wanted to see where he lived, how he existed outside these corporate walls. "Okay," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "Let's go." And when they left the office, hands intertwined, the weight of weeks of tension finally released, they both knew that something fundamental had changed. It wasn't just desire or attraction. It was connection. It was the beginning of something that could be extraordinary or devastating, possibly both. But in that moment, with his fingers intertwined with hers, Olivia couldn't care about the complications. She could only feel the beat of his heart synchronized with hers and the absolute certainty that, no matter what came next, this moment was worth every risk. Aiden's apartment was in an elegant skyscraper on the Upper West Side, on one of the highest floors that offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the illuminated city. When the private elevator doors opened directly into the apartment's entrance hall, Olivia felt a tightness in her chest, not from intimidation at the opulence, but from the intimacy of the moment. She was about to enter his personal space, the sanctuary where he existed away from the corporate world. The interior was exactly what she would expect from Aiden, sophisticated but welcoming, modern but with touches of warmth. Dark wood floors, minimalist design furniture in shades of gray and beige, carefully selected artworks on the walls, and huge windows that transformed the city view into part of the decor. But there were also personal details, books scattered on a side table, an acoustic guitar discreetly leaning in a corner, framed photographs that suggested travels and memories. "It's beautiful," Olivia said softly, walking to the windows. The city stretched before her like a sea of twinkling lights, and Central Park was a dark patch amid the brightness, serene and mysterious. "Thank you," Aiden replied, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of red wine. He had removed his shoes, and there was something incredibly intimate about that small detail, seeing him relaxed in his own space, without corporate armor. "I know it's too big for just one person, but the view—" "I couldn't resist." Olivia accepted the glass, their fingers touching briefly in the process. A simple touch that still sent an electric current across her skin. "I understand. There's something about seeing the city from above that makes everything seem possible." Aiden turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her completely forget about the view. "You make everything seem possible," he said, his voice low, filled with a sincerity that made her heart stumble. They drank in silence for a moment, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was charged, anticipated, vibrant with the awareness that something inevitable was approaching. Olivia could feel it in the way Aiden looked at her, not just with desire, though that was definitely present, but with something deeper, reverence, admiration, as if she were something precious. He feared breaking but couldn't help touching. "Can I ask you a question?" Olivia finally said, turning to face him completely. "Always. Are you scared? Of this, of what's happening between us?" Aiden placed his glass on the nearby table and took a step toward her, eliminating the careful distance they had maintained since arriving. "I'm terrified," he admitted, and the raw vulnerability in those words disarmed her. "Because I don't do this, Olivia. I don't mix work with personal life. I don't cross lines. I don't lose control." He raised his hand and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "But with you, I lose control constantly. And the scariest part is that I don't want to get it back." Olivia placed her own glass aside and raised her hands to his chest, feeling his racing heart under her palms. "I'm scared too," she confessed. "But not of you. I'm afraid of waking up and discovering this isn't real, that I imagined it all." "It's real," Aiden said, leaning in to rest his forehead against hers. "More real than anything I've ever felt." And then he kissed her. And it was different from before. There was no desperate urgency or nervous hesitation. It was intentional, deep, as if they had all the time in the world and wanted to savor every second. His hand slid along her waist, pulling her closer, and Olivia melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck. The kiss gradually deepened, both their breathing accelerating. And when Aiden finally pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire but also loaded with a silent question. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because if you're not, we can stop. We can just talk. Watch something. I can take you home." Olivia silenced him by placing her fingers on his lips. "I'm sure," she said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "I've never been so sure of anything." Something changed in his expression, the last hesitation disappearing, replaced by an intensity that made her legs weaken. He took her hand and guided her through the apartment to the bedroom. The bedroom was an extension of the rest of the apartment, elegant, masculine, with a king-size bed covered in immaculate white sheets and more of those huge windows that brought the city inside. But Olivia barely registered the details. All she could focus on was Aiden, the way he looked at her, the touch of his hands as he gently turned her to face him. "You're beautiful," he said, his eyes traveling across her face as if memorizing every detail, "not just physically. You shine, Olivia, from the inside out." He kissed her again, softer this time, almost reverent. His hands slowly moved up her back, finding the zipper of her dress. He paused, his eyes meeting hers in a silent question, and when she nodded, he slowly, agonizingly slowly, pulled the zipper down. The fabric slid over her shoulders, and Aiden traced the path with his lips, kissing the exposed skin with an adoration that made Olivia tremble, not from cold, but from anticipation, from desire, from the intensity of being the focus of so much concentrated attention. The dress fell to the floor with a soft whisper, and Olivia stood there in simple but elegant lingerie, vulnerable but strangely empowered by the way Aiden looked at her, as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Your turn," she whispered, her fingers going to the buttons of his shirt. She undid them slowly, revealing his defined chest, tanned skin, muscles that suggested he didn't spend all his time behind a desk. When the shirt fell, she let her hands explore the broad shoulders, the firm chest, the line of abdominal muscles. Aiden took her hands and brought them to his lips, kissing each finger with a delicacy that contrasted with the obvious tension in his body. And then, with a fluid movement, he lifted her, and Olivia wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her to the bed. He laid her gently on the white sheets and then stood for a moment, just looking at her. His eyes dark with desire but also with something deeper, care, reverence, perhaps even love, though neither was ready to verbalize that yet. "Are you sure?" he asked again, his voice low, but his eyes clear, giving her the option to stop at any moment. "I am," Olivia replied, reaching out to him. "Come here." Aiden lay beside her, his body pressing against hers, and the heat was overwhelming. He kissed her deeply, while his hands explored, not in a hurry, but with intention, learning what made her sigh, what made her arch against him. His fingers traced lines of fire across her skin, down her neck, over her shoulders, along the curve of her waist. Each touch was intentional, adoring, as if he were trying to memorize the map of her body. And when he finally removed the last barriers of fabric between them, it was with the same reverent delicacy that had marked every movement since they arrived. "You're perfect," Aiden whispered against her skin, his mouth tracing a trail of kisses down her neck, over her shoulders, descending. Each touch of his lips sent waves of heat through Olivia's body, and she heard herself sighing, moaning softly, her hands tangling in his hair. When their bodies finally joined, it was slow, deep, a connection that went beyond the physical. Their eyes remained fixed on each other, their breathing mixing, and there was something incredibly intimate about maintaining that eye contact, about allowing themselves to be completely seen, completely vulnerable. They moved together in a rhythm that was simultaneously passionate and tender, urgent and deliberate. Aiden's hands intertwined with Olivia's, their fingers tightening as they lost themselves in each other. He whispered her name like a prayer, and she responded with sighs and soft moans that encouraged him, that pulled him deeper. The world outside that bedroom ceased to exist. There was only them, skin against skin. Accelerated breathing, hearts beating in sync. It was passion, but it was also connection. It was desire, but it was also care. It was physical but carried the weight of something emotional that neither was completely ready to name. When they finally reached climax, it was together, Olivia's body arching as Aiden's tensed, both whispering each other's name in a mixture of pleasure and something that felt dangerously close to love. Afterward, lying under the white sheets with the city glowing silently through the windows, Aiden pulled Olivia closer, his arm wrapping around her as she rested her head on his chest. His heart still beat rapidly under her ear, and she smiled, tracing lazy circles on his skin. "You're the most real thing in my life," Aiden said softly, his free hand caressing her hair. "And that scares and excites me at the same time." Olivia raised her head to look at him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And you're my fresh start," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Not just professionally, in everything." He kissed her, softly, a kiss that didn't have the urgency of before but somehow carried even more meaning. And then she nestled against him again, their bodies intertwined, and for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt completely safe, completely seen, completely home. And as they fell asleep together, with the city silently witnessing through the windows, they both knew they had crossed a point of no return. What came next would be complicated, challenging, possibly even problematic. But in that moment, it was worth every complication. 18 months. That was the time that had passed since that rainy Friday when Olivia entered Aiden's office with a resignation letter and tears in her eyes. 18 months of transformation, not just professional but personal, emotional, in every way that mattered. Matthews & Co. had expanded aggressively into Latin America under Olivia's strategic leadership, who now commanded the entire international division of the company. What began as an associate executive director position had evolved into something much bigger. She was now vice president of global operations, a position created specifically for her, recognizing not just her competence, but her vision. And beside her, always, was Aiden, not just as CEO or business partner, but as companion, confidant, love. Their relationship had been navigated carefully. Total transparency with the board, clear conflict of interest policies, deliberate separation between professional and personal decisions. It hadn't been easy. There were difficult conversations, constant adjustments, and moments when external scrutiny almost made them question if it was worth it. But it was always worth it, because what they had was rare, a connection that transcended simple categories, that was simultaneously intellectual partnership, physical chemistry, and emotional intimacy. Now Olivia stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in the new Matthews & Co. office in Santiago, Chile, the headquarters of the Latin American division she had built from scratch. The city stretched before her, the Andes creating a dramatic backdrop against the clear blue sky. It was early December summer in the southern hemisphere, and the air carried that luminous quality that made everything seem full of possibilities. The office door had an elegant glass plaque, Olivia Carter Matthews, Vice President, Global Operations, Latin America, Matthews. She still smiled every time she saw the surname, not because she had lost her identity, but because she had chosen to expand, to add a new layer to who she was, just as Aiden had become an integral part of her life. 2 years ago, you walked into my office crying. His voice came from behind, warm, familiar, loaded with that intimate tone he reserved only for her. Olivia turned and found Aiden leaning against the doorframe, wearing a light cream-colored suit that adapted perfectly to Santiago's climate. Sleeves casually rolled up, a soft smile on his lips. He was different, too. He still had that magnetic presence, that intensity in his eyes, but there was a lightness in him now that didn't exist before, as if something that was always tense had finally relaxed. "And you stopped me from giving up," Olivia replied, walking toward him. She wore an emerald green sheath dress that Aiden had commented, made her eyes sparkle, and the warmth in his gaze as she approached confirmed he still thought so. "Actually," Aiden said, reaching her and gently pulling her closer, his hands resting on her waist, "you stopped yourself from giving up. I just locked the door." Olivia laughed, the sound light and genuine, of a happiness she had learned to embrace without fear. "Best decision you ever made?" "Second best," he corrected, his eyes fixed on hers with that intensity that still made her heart race, even after all this time. "What was the first?" "What I'm about to do now." Before Olivia could process the words, Aiden stepped back and then completely unexpectedly, in the middle of the empty office with the city of Santiago stretching around them, he knelt down. Time seemed to stop. Olivia felt the air escape from her lungs, her hands flying to cover her mouth as immediate tears burned in her eyes. She knew what was happening, but it still seemed surreal, impossible, perfectly right all at once. Aiden took out a small navy blue velvet box from the inside pocket of his jacket, and when he opened it, it revealed a solitaire diamond ring, elegant, timeless, perfect in its simplicity. The Chilean sunlight made it sparkle like a promise captured in stone. "Olivia Carter," Aiden began, and his voice was emotional in a way she rarely heard, vulnerable, exposed, absolutely sincere. "Before you, I built a company. I created something the world recognizes as success, but I had no idea what it was to live until you came into my life." A tear rolled down Olivia's face, but she didn't wipe it away. She just stood there, hands still covering her mouth, eyes fixed on him. "You taught me that strength isn't never breaking, it's breaking and rebuilding yourself. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, but courage. You made me want to be better not because I wasn't good enough, but because you inspire greatness just by existing." He paused, swallowing hard, his own eyes shining with emotion. "You're my partner in everything, in business, in life, in dreams we haven't even dared to fully dream yet." He held the box with one hand and extended the other to her, and Olivia took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining tightly. "Before the world sees how amazing you are, though many already do, I want you to know what you are to me. My home, my peace, my passion, my everything I didn't know I was looking for." More tears fell, but Olivia was smiling, her heart so full it felt ready to burst. "Will you marry me?" Aiden finally asked the question, simple but loaded with years of history, of connection, of love built in big and small moments. "Not because I'm your boss, I never really was. Not truly. Not because we need each other professionally, though we're better together, but because I love you completely, irrevocably, forever." Olivia lowered her hands from her mouth, tears now flowing freely, but her smile was radiant, lighting up her entire face. "I saw this future," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "The day you locked that door, I didn't know it yet. I didn't fully understand, but a part of me already knew you would be my always." She knelt too, placing herself at his level, her hands holding his face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I'll marry you." The smile that lit up Aiden's face was absolutely devastating, pure happiness, relief, love so intense it completely transformed his features. He took the ring from the box, with hands that trembled slightly, the only evidence of nervousness he had shown, and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been made to be there. And then he kissed her, not with the urgency of that first time in the office, not with the passion of that night in his apartment, but with something deeper. A kiss that was promise and celebration, past and future, all wrapped in a single perfect moment. When they finally separated, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling. "I love you," Olivia whispered. "I love you so much it sometimes scares me." "I love you more," Aiden replied, kissing her again softly. "And I'm not scared. Not anymore." They stayed kneeling there for another moment, just absorbing the magnitude of what had happened, and then Aiden stood and pulled her with him, wrapping her in his arms. "So," he said, his face buried in her hair, his voice vibrating against the top of her head, "when do you want to do this, the ceremony?" Olivia pulled back slightly to look at him, the ring on her finger catching the light and sparkling. I don't know, something intimate, maybe, just people who really matter. Eleanor will insist on helping to plan, Aidan said with an amused smile. His mother had become one of Olivia's biggest supporters, treating her like the daughter she never had. And I'll love every minute of it, Olivia replied sincerely. They walked together to the window, looking at the city that was now part of their journey. Aidan wrapped Olivia from behind, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder, and they stood there in comfortable silence. Do you remember what I said that first night? Aidan asked softly. That you made me want to be someone better. I remember. I was wrong. He gently turned her in his arms so he could look into her eyes. You don't make me want to be someone better. You make me be someone better just by being at my side. Olivia smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. You do the same for me. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, the ability to believe in myself. They kissed again, long, soft, passionate. A kiss that carried the promise of all future kisses, of all shared sunrises, of all adventures yet to come. Outside, Santiago continued its daily dance. The Cordillera remained majestic against the horizon, and the world kept spinning. But inside that office, with the name Olivia Carter Matthews engraved on the door and an engagement ring sparkling under the Chilean light, two hearts that had found each other in darkness finally celebrated the light they created together. It wasn't just a happy ending. It was a happy beginning of the next phase, the next adventure, the rest of their intertwined lives. And if anyone had asked Olivia in that moment if she regretted that rainy Friday when she entered Aidan's office with a resignation letter, she would have laughed. Because that moment of breaking, of vulnerability, of almost giving up had been the beginning of everything that mattered. Sometimes the end of something is just the beginning in disguise. And sometimes the best thing that can happen is someone locking the door and saying, "You're staying with me." Because that was exactly what changed everything. Olivia walked into that office broken, carrying the weight of someone who had forgotten their own worth. But she walked out transformed, not because someone saved her, but because someone saw her, truly saw her. Aidan didn't fix what was broken in her. He simply held up a mirror and showed what had always been there: strength, brilliance, courage. And in the process of helping her find herself again, he was transformed too. Because true love isn't about completing each other. It's about inspiring each other to become who you were always meant to be. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for us is lock the door when we're about to give up and say, "Not today." You stay. And maybe, deep down, this story also speaks a little about all of us, about the moments when we almost gave up, and about the people who remind us why it's worth staying.